They didn't call it a nursing home. They called it a transitional wellness suite, as if putting the right words on something changed what it was underneath. My daughter had practiced that phrase. I could tell. She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed in the car. The face that went with it already arranged. The one that said, I'm doing this because I love you. Not the one that said, I've already signed the paperwork. I didn't scream when we pulled into the parking lot. I didn't ask her to turn around. I just looked at the building. Maplewood Care and Recovery, the sign said, with a little green leaf that someone must have thought felt friendly, and I thought, this is not what Jim would have done. Jim had been gone 4 years. 4 years of me keeping the house on Birchwood Lane, shoveling snow when I had to, planting tomatoes every May, eating dinner at the table instead of over the sink, because I refused to let grief make me small. 4 years of my daughter Nicole, calling every Sunday, always asking if I was managing okay, in a tone that suggested she hoped the answer would eventually be no. It became no in February, a pot of water I'd set to boil for pasta. I'd walked into the living room to answer my phone, gotten pulled into the call. It was Lila, my granddaughter, checking in from college, and by the time I smelled something burning, the pot had gone dry and scorched the bottom. Nothing caught fire. There was no emergency. But Nicole had been coming by the next afternoon anyway, and she saw the pot, and that was the end. Mom, she said, and her voice had that careful, lowered quality I've come to recognize as the sound of a decision already made. Holt and I have been talking. Holt was her husband. He wore polo shirts and shook hands too firmly and had never once in 14 years asked me a single question about my life before Nicole. He had opinions about everything. Interest rates, traffic patterns, what kind of car a woman my age should drive. And he delivered those opinions the way people do when they've never once been told they were wrong. They drove me to Maplewood on a Thursday morning. Nicole carried one bag. She'd packed it herself. 3 pairs of slacks, some blouses, my blue robe, a framed photo of her and Holt at Nantucket, which I thought was an interesting choice of decoration. Not a photo of Jim. Not a photo of Lila. I stood in the lobby and a woman named Donna, with reading glasses on a lanyard and a voice like warm oatmeal, told me my room was ready and that I'd love the Thursday afternoon bingo. I don't play bingo, I said. She smiled the smile of someone who had heard that before. Nicole hugged me at the door. She held on one beat too long, the way people do when they know they're doing something that requires an apology they don't intend to give. Just until we figure things out, she said. We'll find you something better. She left. I watched the doors close. I had not signed anything. I didn't realize until the next morning that Holt had. He'd used the power of attorney I'd signed 2 years after Jim died. Back when I thought the responsible thing was to make arrangements. Back when every lawyer's ad said, get your affairs in order. I'd signed it without reading it carefully because Nicole said it was just a formality and I had trusted her. That was the kind of thing I used to do. Trust. My room was on the 2nd floor. The window faced a parking lot, and beyond it, a strip mall. There was a hairline crack in the ceiling above my bed that I stared at most of that first night. On the 2nd day, I asked about using the phone. The aide, a young man named Kyle who worked mornings and always seemed to be slightly late, told me personal calls needed to be coordinated through the front desk. Coordinated, I said. It's just the process, he said, in the voice people use when they know the process is unreasonable. On the 3rd day, Nicole sent a box. Inside, more clothes, my pill organizer, and a velvet travel bag I didn't recognize. I opened it. Inside was Jim's briefcase. The small brown one, scuffed at the corners, the one he'd had since before we were married. I assumed Nicole had found it in the bedroom closet and thought she was being thoughtful. I set it on the desk and didn't open it right away. Anything of Jim's still needed a moment, a breath, before I could handle it without my hands going strange. That evening, after the dinner trays were collected and the hallway quieted down, I sat in the chair by the window and opened the latches. Inside, a legal pad with Jim's handwriting on it, some old receipts, a pocket Bible his mother had given him in 1969, and in the back zipper compartment, folded into thirds, a piece of paper I didn't recognize. I pulled it out, a deed, recorded with the county clerk's office, dated March 1981. James Ainsworth. That was Jim, sole purchaser of 14.3 acres of undeveloped land in Creston County, along Route 9 near the old feed store. I sat very still. I remembered that year. Jim had driven out there one weekend and come back happy in a quiet way he didn't talk about much. He'd said, "I found us something, Colette. Insurance, just in case the rest of it falls apart." I'd asked him what he meant, and he'd said, "Nothing's going to fall apart, but a man likes to know there's a floor." I hadn't thought about it since. We'd never needed a floor, or so I thought. I turned the deed over in my hands. Months ago, Lila had mentioned something. Her college was doing a project on regional development, something about Creston County, about how the state was running a commercial corridor through the area, how land values there had tripled in 2 years. I hadn't connected it to anything then. I hadn't had reason to. I folded the deed back into thirds and held it in my lap. Jim had bought that land for nothing. Country roads, scrub pines, nobody's backyard. 43 years, untouched, unmentioned. Maybe because he'd forgotten. Maybe because he was waiting for the right moment and then he got sick, and there weren't any more right moments. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed with the deed tucked inside the Bible, inside the briefcase, under my blue robe in the closet, and I thought about floors. There was a woman named Beryl in room 204. She was 81, former postal supervisor, and had the posture of someone who had spent decades not letting anyone make her feel small. She'd been at Maplewood 2 years. Her son in Phoenix called on Christmas and her birthday, which she said she appreciated. Though I could hear in the way she said it that she didn't. We started sharing the table near the window at breakfast. She took her coffee black and complained about the eggs every single morning and then ate every bite of them. "You've got the look," she said to me one morning, about a week in. What look? The look of someone who knows something they're not saying. She pointed her fork at me. I recognize it because I don't get to use it anymore. Everyone stopped assuming I know anything. I looked at her for a long moment. "What would you do," I said, "if you found out you had something they didn't know about?" She set her fork down. "I'd be very quiet," she said, "and I'd find a lawyer. The night aide who worked Tuesday and Thursday shifts. A woman named Sue who did crossword puzzles at the desk and never asked unnecessary questions. Had given me the staff phone number during my first week. She hadn't specified it was only for emergencies. I decided that was an oversight I could work with. On a Thursday night, I waited until 11. Then I padded into the hallway in my slippers, told Sue I thought I'd heard something in the laundry room, and while she went to check, I picked up the desk phone and called directory assistance. What I needed was an estate attorney who handled elder law. There was a firm in the county seat. I'd seen their ad on the back of a church bulletin. Someone had left in the common room. I left a message, said I was calling on behalf of a resident with a time-sensitive estate concern, asked for a call back Thursday afternoon. They called back Friday morning, a man named Clement Briggs, associate attorney. I took the call in the supply closet, door mostly closed, while the morning shift change happened and nobody was watching carefully. I told him I was a resident at Maplewood, that I had not agreed to this placement voluntarily, that I had a piece of property registered in my late husband's name that appeared to have significant current value, and that my daughter held power of attorney, and I had reason to believe she would act on that authority in ways that didn't reflect my wishes. He asked 2 questions. First, did I have the physical deed? Second, was I of sound mind? Yes to both, I said. The following Tuesday, a man in a gray jacket signed in as a representative from a patient advocacy nonprofit. He carried a canvas tote bag and a clipboard, and the receptionist offered him parking validation. We met in the family lounge. He brought a notary. Clement Briggs was around 50, with the kind of careful quietness that good lawyers have. The ability to make you feel like every word you say is being handled with appropriate weight. I laid the deed on the table. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up. Has anyone else seen this? No. Does your daughter know this land exists? Jim had never mentioned it to Nicole. He'd always said she had her mother's impatience with anything that didn't pay off immediately. He'd meant it fondly, but he'd kept the land to himself. She doesn't know, I said. Clement nodded slowly. I had my office run the county assessor records this morning after you called. He opened his bag and removed a printout. The land on Route 9 in Creston County, 14.3 acres. Assessed value as of last year, $3.84 million. Commercial rezoning was approved 18 months ago. There's a development group that's been acquiring adjacent parcels. I sat with that number for a moment. Jim, I said quietly, not to Clement, just out loud. We talked for an hour. The plan took shape, a trust established through his firm with a neutral trustee. The deed transferred through proper probate channels since the land was technically Jim's estate property. My granddaughter Lila named as primary beneficiary. With conditions, with protections, structured the way you structure something for someone who has never once asked you for anything. A challenge filed against the power of attorney on the grounds that it had been invoked without my informed consent and used to facilitate a residential placement I had not agreed to. The placement alone may be sufficient, Clement said. You were cognitively competent. You were not a danger to yourself. A scorched pot is not a legal basis for stripping someone of their autonomy. Tell that to my daughter, I said. We will, he said, in court if necessary. Before he left, he handed me a small envelope with a number I could call directly. He told me to memorize it and get rid of the paper. I thought about how strange it was. Meeting in back rooms, keeping secrets in plain sight, memorizing numbers like someone in a film. And I thought that maybe the reason those films were always about men was because nobody believed a woman my age could be this careful, this quiet, and this thoroughly prepared to win. Nicole visited on a Saturday. Caramel-colored coat, probably cashmere. Holt parked in the handicap spot again, which I had given up mentioning. She brought me a poinsettia. It wasn't Christmas. How are you settling in? She asked, glancing around my room the way she used to glance around my house. Cataloging. Settling, I said. She sat in the chair by the window, the same chair where I'd opened Jim's briefcase. I watched her sit there and felt something settle in my chest, quiet and final. We've been looking at some options, she said. For the house, with the market the way it is. I haven't agreed to sell the house, I said. She looked at me with that particular patience that isn't patience at all. Mom, you're not using it. It's my house, Nicole. We have the authority to. She stopped. Rearranged. We just want the assets managed responsibly. There it was. Managed. I looked at my daughter. She was 51 years old. She had her father's eyes and none of his patience, and I had loved her without condition for her entire life, and she had looked at that love the way some people look at a guaranteed inheritance, as something they were owed, something that wouldn't run out. I'd like you to talk to my attorney, I said. She blinked. Your what? My attorney. His name is Clement Briggs. The color in her face shifted. Not guilt. Nicole had always been too certain of herself for guilt, but recalculation. When did you get an attorney? She asked. I've always had the right to one, I said. I just finally used it. She left without the poinsettia. I gave it to Beryl, who put it on her windowsill and said it was the nicest thing anyone had given her in 6 months. The hearing was 4 weeks later. A courtroom in the county seat. Small, fluorescent lit. Venetian blinds on the single window that didn't quite close all the way. Nicole sat on the other side with her attorney, a man who looked expensive and harried. Holt was not there. I noticed that. Clement told me later that Holt had been advised to stay away. Clement had prepared a cognitive assessment, a psychiatric evaluation, a timeline of the placement proceedings, and a letter from my primary care physician stating that I had no diagnosis of dementia, no history of psychiatric hospitalization, and no condition impairing my ability to manage my own affairs. He also had a notation from the original power of attorney document, where the triggering conditions were defined. Those conditions had not been met. Burning a pot of pasta water was not among them. The judge was a woman around my age, maybe slightly younger. She read the documents the way I used to read student papers, not just the words, but the spaces between them. She asked me 2 questions directly. First, did I feel I had been placed at Maplewood against my will? I said yes. I said I had not been consulted, had not been given information about alternatives, had not been told a power of attorney was being invoked, and had not understood I would not be free to leave. Second, did I feel capable of managing my own life? I said. I burned a pot of water. I had been on the phone with my granddaughter. I had been tired and grieving and momentarily distracted. I had also, in the 4 weeks since my placement, identified a significant asset, retained legal counsel, arranged an estate trust, and appeared in this courtroom. I thought that demonstrated adequate capacity. The judge looked at Nicole for a long moment. Then she made some notes and issued her ruling. Power of attorney revoked. Return of personal decision-making authority. Immediate. I didn't cry. I held my hands in my lap and breathed. Outside on the courthouse steps, Nicole caught up with me. She wasn't yelling. That surprised me. She just stood there with her coat open in the cold, looking at me like she was seeing someone she didn't quite recognize. Was this about money? She asked. The land? No, I said. It was about the pot. She frowned. You made a decision about my entire life because of a pot of water. You didn't ask me. You didn't discuss it with me. You took the worst month I'd had in years and used it to take everything. I paused. You had 42 years of me in that house. 42 years of meals and school pickups and sitting up worrying about you and being there when you needed someone to be there. And you never once thought to ask me what I wanted. You just looked at me and decided I was finished. I looked at her steadily. I'm not finished, Nicole. I was never finished. You just stopped looking. She opened her mouth. I walked past her toward Clement's car. I did not look back. Looking back is for people who are still not certain they made the right choice. Beryl knew I was leaving before I told her. She just did. I found her in the common room the morning of my last day, working a word puzzle with a felt tip pen she'd taken from the activities cart. She looked up when I sat across from her. Today, she said. This afternoon. She nodded, then she set the pen down. Don't go soft on her, she said. On your daughter. I know you will eventually, because that's the kind of woman you are. But not yet. Give yourself time to get your feet under you first. You could get your feet under you too, I said. I'd had Clement look into her situation. She hadn't asked me to. I put a business card on the table between us. That's his direct line. He knows your name already. No charge for the first conversation. She looked at the card for a long time without touching it. Then she picked it up and put it in the pocket of her cardigan. Colette Ainsworth, she said, reading the name I'd written on the back. I'll remember that. Make sure they do too, I said. The cottage was 40 minutes from Maplewood, on a bluff above a river outside a small town called Harwick. 2 bedrooms. A porch facing east. A kitchen with a gas stove and good light through the window above the sink. I moved in on a Thursday. I carried my own bags. There are things you need to do yourself to know you can still do them. I made tea. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the river. Very still in the morning. Probably louder in the afternoon when the wind came up. I thought about Jim. I thought about the deed, folded into thirds, tucked in the back pocket of a briefcase for 43 years, waiting for a moment when I needed a floor. He knew. I don't know how he knew. It couldn't have been specific. But he knew there would come a time when I needed something that was entirely mine, something with my name on it that nobody could take without consequence. I said thank you out loud to the kitchen. It felt a little foolish. It also felt exactly right. The trust was in motion. The land sale in Creston County was progressing. Lila knew. I'd called her the week before, and she'd gone very quiet, and then said Grandma in a voice that broke and steadied itself at the same time. I don't need it, she'd said. I know, I'd said. That's exactly why it's yours. I opened the window. The air smelled like river water and pine, and the particular cold of a morning about to warm into something decent. I had nowhere to be. Nobody was going to knock on my door to ask if I'd taken my pills. Nobody was going to record my mood on a chart. Nobody was going to call me sweetie when they were irritated with me. I made a second cup of tea and sat in the chair facing the window. There is a particular kind of woman they don't write about enough. She is older. She is tired sometimes. She has a hairline crack in a ceiling she didn't choose, and she stares at it in the dark and thinks and waits and does not make noise until making noise will actually do something. She is not finished. She was never finished. and anyone who thought otherwise simply did not know her well enough to know what she was holding.